I'm Bobby Gilstrap, and this is our SBC Pastors Roundtable. I have with me today 3 pastors, so let's take just a moment and let them introduce themselves. Bert, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Bert Spann. I'm a pastor in Middle Tennessee, and I've been here for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was in Michigan, where I was an established church pastor, but I worked closely with a planters network in starting new churches. Jim, how about you?
I'm Jim Bohrer. I started mission work in Colorado for about 1.5 years. Then I went to Kentucky and pastored there. I went to school. Then Billy Graham called me up and I served the crusade staff for about 1 year and ended up here and been here at this church 22 years. To you, Don.
Yeah, I'm Don Elbourne, pastor of Lakeshore Baptist Church, where I've served as pastor now for 27 years. We're down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, just about a mile from the beach. We also host, we're a mission trip destination, and so you can come do a mission trip with us on the coast. Bobby, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Bobby Gilstrap. I'm the founder of Dynamic Church Ministries, serve now as a transitional pastor, but have been a pastor and church planter in the SBC. Went to Michigan as an appointed NAM missionary in church planting and associational missions, and then ended up as the executive director for the state convention there. Have now moved to Atlanta several years back, worked with church planting and consulting with churches in transition here. So we're glad to have these guys joining us today, and we're glad you're joining us also. We're just going to talk about some of the hot topics, some of the things that are being discussed kind of around the table. And so if you can just imagine the 4 of us sitting in maybe your associational office around a table having a discussion, or maybe in a coffee shop, or maybe at your church, we're just going to kind of be talking through issues. So we're not going to pull up, here's a document necessarily on that, although we've all done a lot of reading and we've heard a lot of things. So we want to discuss that. One of the first things I wanted to just kind of start us off with is talking about the Great Commission Resurgence. The Great Commission Resurgence was passed back in 2010 in the Orlando Convention, and it's had a huge impact on the SBC. So I want to start off with a quote that I heard Randy Adams say. Now, he's one of the presidential candidates, and all 4 of the presidential candidates have been doing interviews and saying things, but in response to a question about the GCR, or the Great Commission Resurgence, this is what he said. He said, "The Great Commission Resurgence is the worst decision Southern Baptists have made in several decades. In fact, it has led to the worst decade in the history of the SBC." What do you guys think about that quote? Is he on? Is he off? Is he accurate? Is he not?
Ooh, that's strong language.
It is, but what do you think? Is he on target?
Whenever you've got numbers to back it up, it's tough to argue. What are your thoughts, guys?
Yeah, numbers, Bert, like you said, along with that Randy Adams quote, he gave those statistics that I just recently saw, and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize it was that bad. You know, those numbers, that chart just goes way down, and it's definitely something to talk about and listen to. I think it was Kevin Azell who said, give us 10 years and we'll assess it. Isn't that what he said, Bobby? And here we are 10 years later, and we're assessing it. So.
Yeah, he basically said, hold me accountable in 10 years. He basically said, hold me accountable.
That's what concerns me the most.
Okay, Jim?
The 10-year process of waiting to evaluate. Again, we got to be careful of just saying, the decision, the Great Commission was just a horrible decision. It was probably an idea that somebody had, but they weren't being accountable to shareholders in a sense, or to the body of Christ as a whole. And you can have issues of cultural change. The culture has changed radically, so it's going to be more difficult for a conservative group in a very liberalized place like America to have a great expansion. But when we see great decline, a total lack of effectiveness, even in areas where we do have historic representation, we need to have some sort of answers and accountability, and even outside auditing. Hey, is this really effective use of our money, time, and energy? And that's what
Jim, I want to ask you something. Now, Jim's in Indiana, but I'm about to out you, Jim. You're about to make some enemies. Jim is a Clemson fan.
Amen. My blood floweth orange.
Yeah, this is a bad thing. Before we went live, Jim's using a virtual background. And he had a Clemson background and just made me cringe. But anyway, let me ask you this, Jim. Knowing that you're a Clemson fan, if after 2-3 years, if Clemson had seen charting out all of their metrics and the charts look like what we see the SBC metrics, do you think you would have been keeping the head coach and the coaching staff, everybody actually, for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is that realistic that those in charge of that program would have been kept by the donors, by the trustees, by those who were managing that program, Jim? I mean, what do you think?
Well, the history tells you differently just with our school. Ford was out when he had a violation. Bowden, a great guy. I know Bowden. He came to my dorm and he lived with us. He talked to us face to face, even talked to me a few times, had conversations, cared about, but just couldn't do that job. Not an issue of his character, not an issue of his mind. Just he was not able to carry the team the way that they expected it. And that's when Dabo Swinney came up through that process of being there. And they didn't think Dabo was going to do it, but they gave him a chance, and as he proved himself, he took off, and that's what concerns me.
Well, how long did it take for Dabo to prove himself? I mean,
just a couple
they
years.
gave him more than a year, right?
Yeah. Well, but he had, got to remember too, with that situation, Dabo had been on staff. Dabo had been the recruiter, so Dabo had already been in line to set up a team. So I mean, there was a little more on ramping than just a year or two. He had that team, but 10 years. Come on, give me a break. You're out
Right.
as a CEO. Your company's failed. You don't understand the dynamics that going on. And you may be good in one area, but this is that Peter principle. Just
okay. So let's bring it back to the SBC. Bring it back to the SBC. Mm-hmm. All three of you have mentioned this now, and we don't have the chart. Maybe I can find the chart, right, and we can throw it up on the screen here in a second. But when you look at some of those charts, what are the things that you remember seeing that we are in decline? What are we dropping in that concerns you?
Oh, I've got the chart right here.
Oh,
I just
okay.
It's what I was looking at earlier. It's total baptisms, church plants. I mean, name a topic.
I mean, is there any topic that we're going up in?
Church plant budget. Church plant budget we're going up in. I mean,
okay. Well, let me ask you this: if the church plant budget's going up, but church plants are going down, I mean, prior to the GCR, we were seeing, 10, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 church plants a year, basically, that were connected to NAM. Last year's report came out under 600. It was 500 or something. I don't remember the exact number. But our budget, which you just mentioned, Bert, has exponentially grown.
Right.
Exponentially grown. 60-something million dollars, like 69 million or something. I'd have to look at that again. But I mean, what are you guys thinking about what's happening with that? I mean, why are we allowing that to happen in Southern Baptist?
I think it's because we do a lot of play on emotions. I mean, when we have the Annie Armstrong Easter offering, man, it's a plug to go out there and to give for missions, which all Southern Baptists love to do. We love hearing about new churches started. And we advertise, so to speak, so passionately. Of course, God-fearing givers are going to give. The accountability is not there, which we'll, I'm sure, get to later. So the budget's going out the roof. Nobody's saying, okay, what are we getting for this money? How many church plants are we seeing? And that was a problem that I saw in Michigan whenever I was there working with Church Planter Network. Is, where's the money? Where's the plants?
Yeah, well, other two guys, what do you think about this with the budget being so high and our plant, quote unquote, we're in ministry, we don't like talking, production, but the reality is you've got to evaluate what, they call in marketing the ROI, the return on investment. So Southern Baptists are sending mission dollars, Bert. You talked about that, and they're motivated. So they send in mission dollars, and this is the return on our investment. So Jim, Don, what do you think?
I have kind of a couple of thoughts, Bobby, and kind of questions that I have that I hadn't been able to find the answers to, is that, and I'm kind of trying to I like to be kind of generous, not just attacking something,
Right.
So one question would be, what is NAM's answer to this? Or I hadn't heard if they've given explanation or anything like that. And maybe there is some reasons, for those numbers to be as wonky as they are. I don't know. And one issue that might be an interesting thing that I haven't seen anybody talk about is, we can register the number of church plants, but how much viability do they have? And I know about 10 years ago, we were kind of pretty low on how successful church plants were. I forgot what the percentage was, but it was a pretty low percentage of church plants.
At the like 3 and 5 year mark.
Later. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And so are we doing better with that? I don't know. And that's what I think NAM should be saying and telling us, to maybe answer that question, because a lot of us are having those concerns, but the answers don't seem readily available.
Yeah, you're not the first to ask those questions.
Right.
Jim?
That's you're hitting the nail on the head there, Don. It's not a matter of how valuable is a soul, how valuable financially in this earthly realm is a church plant, but what is our comparisons? Someone's a God. They do pretty well. What does it cost per plant there? What's in our system now that's not effective? What's in our system that's costing double? So it's less plants and double the cost. And is the outcome any better? So let's say, I want quality, not quantity. Well, great. I'm a quality and quantity guy. So we make sure people are trained, make sure they're the best you get. But you're going to have failure in any startup, just in a business startup. Very few businesses last. A startup business last 3 or 5 years. So I don't expect churches, even though they're more than a business, they have to function with income and stuff to be 100% of one plant, one outcome. But what are our numbers? What's the comparisons, and how are we doing now compared to them? And what's driving the change? What is be honest about what's your strategy and what's your outcome based, and tell the people that, because I'd rather have more guys that are qualified and have some good doctrine, and they have a heart for Jesus, and they have some qualification and some competency out there than saying we're going to interview for years and spend money on the interview process and hope to get a good guy. I know with hiring, it's 50-50 hiring at the best, any job you have. So what are we doing?
Yeah, I used to always say that when the GCR was passed, you started hearing frequently, well, all we want is 5-star planters. We want 5-star planters, right. 5-star planters. And I kept trying to say, look, I'm working in Michigan. Michigan's very diverse. It's a working class, blue collar kind of a state. It's different than the guy you would want planting in North Atlanta. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But the guy you want planting in Detroit is going to look different than the guy you want planting in Bad Axe, Michigan, or up in Traverse City or wherever in Michigan. And in my view, you can have a 5-star planter in both of those places, but they look different. They assess different. Their skill sets are different. And they both deserve to be adequately funded for the cost of living where they are. But the assessment was very narrow. Let's don't get sidetracked on that. You got me started on a pet peeve. Go ahead, Bert.
Your question about assessing the health of these church plants. From working with the church plants when I was there, one thing became obvious to me. While we as Southern Baptists call them plants and planters, the people who are coming to know Christ, that is a church and their pastor.
Right.
And so when we assess and we start pumping numbers out there and we say, look at us, how many church plants we've got, and they fail in the next 2 years, that's somebody who has lost their church family, and they have lost their pastor, and that pastor is crushed in spirit. And to me, that's what we need to be asking with this Great Commission Resurgence, not how many plants can we get, how many churches and pastors have been started and established and continue, not just, hey, give us more money so we can chuck more guys in the field.
Right.
What are we doing with them once they're there?
Right. And that's what I'm saying. If, say, 10 years ago, when we were planting over 1,000 churches a year, and only 30% of those were viable 5 years later, and if now, and I have no idea what the numbers are, if now it's 80% are viable, then I'd be fine with only planting 550 churches rather than 1,500.
Don, I would say, I think what you said was true. I would be, but again, if it's you don't have a percentage of a church. It's how many actual churches are really viable. And when we're talking about viability, I can have a viable church of 20 people. That's a Bible study. You see what I'm saying? Is it a viable, reproducing church? Is it able to take care of its own ministries? Or is it just simply a nice preaching point for a young guy? We have to have better metrics than simply, 30%. I'd rather have 30% of 20,000 than 80% of 500, because that's the real number would be bigger at the 20,000 if it's the same cost. You see what I'm saying? And even there, with the ones that failed, the gospel still is being presented. We know the highest rate of conversion occurs in church plants and new starts than existing churches.
Well, and it reminds me of a story a church planter friend of mine told me several years back. He said, I'm much more supportive of bunny rabbit church planting than I am elephant church planting. Correct. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, how quickly do elephants reproduce? It's, what is it, 18-month gestation period or something? I mean, it's long. Right. And he said, how quickly do bunnies reproduce? Oh, my soul. I mean, over and over. I mean, he said, but most of the bunnies live. He said, but they're not all huge. Bunnies don't grow to be the size of an elephant. Yep. I would rather have a bunch of bunny churches that have 50, 75 people all across the way reaching out into their communities, having people saved, than I would to have only a few, quote unquote, he called them elephant churches, that don't reproduce that often and aren't reproducing many babies. Trying to think of another word, but they're not reproducing much at that point. And to me, that was such a good visual of, but to do that, then we need to have the accountability. We need to, be able to have the metrics, like you said, Jim, to check back and forth. Now, Don, let me jump on this. I think you are the one asked just a minute ago about knowing where all the money is going, that's being spent, and what the response to that is. That question has been asked. I've had a number of people that I know who have asked, where is that going? Why do we have such a large bank of money that's counted as church planting? And right now, the North American Mission Board is not very accountable. And so they have just like one big heading in the budget that we see that says X number of $1 million, $69 million, whatever. And underneath that, we don't know how much of that is being spent for church planter salary support. How much of that is being spent to buy these houses we know they're buying? How much is that being spent on insurance? How much of that is being spent on, the list could be long, 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 right? Mm-hmm. And it's my view that Southern Baptists should have some idea how that's being spent. I don't want to see a check register, but I would sure like to see a breakdown of how much of that. The other thing that frustrates me about that is we have had people that I know that have asked, how many church plants do we actually have in our state? Where are those church plants? Joe Westbury did that article several months back where he asked that question and NAM refused to answer it. And when I was the executive director, this is true for you guys in your states probably too, but when I was executive director, I knew every church planter who was getting NAM funding because we were partnered with the state convention. So the state convention knew that. We knew how much it was. North American Mission Board it was a huge check, but they sent a check. X number of dollars were designated for evangelism, so much for church planting, etc., whatever our partnership agreement was at that point. And then we cut a check for $1,000, $1,500, $700, whatever it was, that was sent to each of those planters' support through their partner church usually, but it was for their support. But we knew, since the GCR, NAM has tried to take all that away. They've cut off the partnerships now with our state conventions. Our state conventions don't even know how many church plants are now being funded in their own states. To me, that's a huge problem. We need to have that transparency where we can see, hey, look, how many plants are in my state that you're funding? And not only how many, but wouldn't you like to, and don't you think your people would like to know how much each of those plants are getting? Because if there's 69 million going out the door, those plants ought to be getting 60 something thousand a piece. Right. That's not happening, we're pretty sure. And we know that from some of the testimonies of church planters. But anyway, I've rambled on, but what do you guys think? I mean, we're talking GCR. So this is since GCR, some of this has happened.
Bob, can you go back to some of the thought here, and maybe Don and Bert kind of respond to that? But the concept of not knowing who's in your state, why would that even be a reality? Why would that be something to not share? Why would that, what would be an issue there? See, that raises so many questions.
That's a great question.
Why?
Well,
imagine, yeah.
I was going to kind of play the devil's advocate for a second, and this is not what I agree with, but I can understand how some people can see that makes sense, because I remember explaining to our church how this kind of thing works, and people saying that just seems so inefficient. We send our money to the state takes part of that money, sends it to the SBC, part of that money goes to NAM, and then part of that money comes back into our state. We're like, that seems just so inefficient. And so streamlining it seems like it would be a better stewardship. But really, when you try to streamline it and try to be more efficient, what do you lose? And it loses accountability and transparency. And that's where we've gotten to where we are. Does that make sense?
I want to go back to you. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'm in the same mindset. If you streamline, I'm going back to not knowing their names.
Right.
That's a totally different issue. Why is it secretive as to who we're supporting? We should be praying for them, excited about them, and we should. And even if you're not receiving funds from the state and they should connect and be willing to share resources. Is it stealth church planning? Are we planning invisible churches? I mean, imagine having people paying for staff position in your church, right? And nobody knows who your youth pastor is. Nobody knows.
Right.
What would go on then? What would happen in your church at that moment?
Truth be told, at least the way NAM's doing it now,
right,
our general population of Southern Baptist church members don't understand what's being produced. In case in point, last year, I got the North American Mission Board calendar, where you flip through and you pray for somebody weekly or daily or whatever. I'm going through there and I'm looking at names and stuff. I know one from Michigan. I'm thinking, what's he in this church planting thing for? And it appeared that this person was a church planter, just by the simple wording. If you don't know that it's kind of the area strategist, it looks like this is a church planter, but this person's been a pastor there for a couple of decades. And so Joe Blow in the pews doesn't have a clue that this is not a church planter. They're praying that God helps this church planter. And
Bert, can you pause the explanation here and go to the specifics here? What are you saying? This guy is a pastor in an existing church and receiving church planting funds?
Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't some of these guys whom I'm talking about, that if they're not getting funds, they're at least helping figure out where funds need to go for some of these area plants?
Yeah, the best I understand, and it's true in multiple states, that NAM has hired guys that are established church pastors, and they bring them on now part-time, call them a church planting catalyst or strategist or something of that sort. CPC is what we were calling them at the time by them. And so they are supplementing their income, even though they're in a church plant, and they are supposed to be helping to catalyze other churches. I don't know how many that has gone to, and if that strategy is still in place. I know that there were a number of guys that I was aware of that had begun to get kind of catalyst funds to do that, and I wasn't seeing in their areas, more church plants starting at that point. But again, that goes back to transparency,
Right.
because that could, if that's, maybe I'm misrepresenting that. I mean, I'll totally be glad to be corrected if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm misrepresenting that. But if we had transparency, we could see that, we could know that. And I'm not sure who
Right.
Bert's talking to specifically, and he don't want to call the name, but that it could be a pastor who's been a pastor for 20 something years that they brought in, or something, to do that. It's just hard to know without the transparency. Yeah,
and
go
they're
ahead, Jim.
basically doing what guys at the convention, state conventions, and the local associations used to do,
Or not doing it. Or not doing
doing
it. I mean, they could be getting paid. Like I am aware of that too. People who should have been off the church planting dole, and their church isn't quite making it. Making it being self-sustaining. And all of a sudden, there's still funds going their way, and there's not catalytic church planting going on. There's not this great resources. And also, I'm looking at it going, have they grown their church at all? And I'm not seeing church growth in these people's their background. They're not experienced. They happen to have a certain theological bent. I've noticed a certain narrow theological bent that seems to be in line with some people, but that's not. I mean, preach Jesus, Southern Baptist overall doctrine. That's what we're looking for. But it seems odd to me. That's what I'm hearing, and I'm pretty certain that what I observed in a couple places, that is what happened in two places. That they may be the anomaly. But hearing that and seeing this is concerning, because we're either, that's fine. You want to help a church out, call it church renewal. Don't call it church planting. Be honest about what we do, because if we have less church plants now, right? But of that number, there's a bigger percentage of existing churches being funded as church plants. That's even less church plants than what we've had before. That would be very concerning to me. I don't know this for absolute fact, but hearing you guys talk and seeing these numbers, I'm getting more concerned than ever before.
Let me throw something else at you. Since the Great Commission stuff, because I was in the church planting network, it was like a mother church. We were the mother church. I don't know what they call it today, but we were the mother church for a church plant. It wasn't until then that I realized that we're starving our church planters to death. I mean, they're getting pennies. It would be below the poverty level.
Mm-hmm.
And then we tell them, hey, you can't go out and solicit funds because you're a damn church planter. So basically they have to starve to death. Because of that, I flew down from Michigan to Nashville to have a conversation with Morris Chapman about this very thing. I said, this is not right. I said, my grandmother, others in the pews, they have no idea that we're not fully funding our church planters. They think that NAM missionaries are just like our IMB missionaries. When we say there's a church planter, we're taking care of our missionaries. Okay. I said, we're not. To me, that's part of the accountability thing too. Yeah, when you have 10,000 new church planters, but each of them are getting about $1,000 a month, it's a little exaggerated, but not much.
Right.
The question is, what are we doing with our church planters? Man, we're starving them. They got little kids, they got rent. Like you said, some of the rent is in high rent areas.
And well, Bert, let me pick up on that and redirect us a little bit. From what we understand right now, that's not true in all cases. It's just like Dahati Lewis, who is the vice president now with church planting at NAM and has been for several years now, but he was pastor and planter for Blueprint Church here in Atlanta. And he was helping, they were bringing on a guy, we just call him John O because none of us can pronounce his last name, but brought on John O. And NAM gave him a big loan. I don't remember the number, but gave him a big loan to help him buy this property. And then he asked for, it seems like I remember the number was $150,000 to be given to him for renovations, that kind of thing. And soon, very soon after he received that money, now that's a huge amount of money. Most of our planters hadn't gotten that kind of money, but he got that kind of money, you're presuming because of the connectedness to Dahati, and he gets that money and just in almost no time after getting it, he publicly goes out and says, look, I can't handle all this stuff going on in the SBC, and I can't handle this. And he says, I'm leaving the SBC. Well, let me be clear. He did not hand us back a check for $150,000 in cooperative program dollars, nor the money that was loaned to him that I understand. But I know the 150 wasn't returned at that point. And so we know, because we have testimonies, there are some planters who are connected to certain people who are receiving and getting to live in $550,000, $600,000 homes in different areas. Homes are being bought in places that are not. I mean, there's one church in Oklahoma City. It's 300 and some odd number miles from the nearest Sin City, where 2 houses have been bought, and they're connected to the Quail Springs Church. Well, why is that when our Sin City is supposed to be targeted at the cities, right? Well, again, going back to the transparency, we don't know how the money's being spent. Okay, so all the planters are not making pennies, but it's not equitable either. And Jim, I'm with you. I've advocated always that the funding for planter support should be adjusted according to cost of living. It is different to live in Central Tennessee or Middle Tennessee than New York City or wherever. Okay, so that makes sense.
Can I push back some on
Yes.
things we're saying
Yeah,
here? I want
please
to push
do.
back. First off, I don't know the details. Maybe you know details. But to me, loaning money at NAM for a house that could become equity and become property that can come back to plant more churches, that's not a big deal to me if they have a good business plan. If it's just, hey, my buddy, that's a problem. But if it's a business plan and they understand that this property could appreciate, or it could save them money for the salary and stuff, and it still is a property they repurchase up, that's great. Or the church pays back. I have got no problem spending $1 million in a house if that's what that church wants to do and the people want to do. On the other side, too, I don't think we have to fund all of our church planters at a living wage, because I think it's up to the state and the area to say, hey, this is a rural community. This is a guy who's got a good job. He wants to be a part-time pastor. We can get 20, 30 people starting here, maybe get 70 people. And he just needs a little extra fund so he doesn't have to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week. And he really has a heart to do it, but he is never going to be a full-time ministry because it's a small area. I think that's where we have to say we can understand differences there, but there needs to be accountability and transparency. And if we can't answer those questions at the state level.
But Jim, part of our problem now is the mode that NAM has moved into since GCR has been a top-down management type mode. So they have disconnected themselves from the associations, disconnected themselves from state conventions. I mean, I'll have to admit, one of the big mistakes I made as the executive director toward the end of my tenure there was I agreed under a lot of pressure, and I get it. There was lots of stuff and pressure in lots of places, but I agreed to go ahead and let our people and our church planting catalyst become NAM funded 100%.
Right.
Now, they hung a lot of carrots out there. Well, we'll cover their insurance. We'll do this. We'll do that. Where before we were initially at an 85-15 split. State convention paid 15% of all that. North American Mission Board paid the other 85%. And it was a joint partnership. Right. But NAM was wanting to move away from that. We were in a struggling convention where we were just barely getting by, had a terrible financial history, even prior to my coming for years. And so there was a lot of pressure there to try to say, okay, this would relieve some of our financial pressure to do some other things. Looking back now, I didn't know all this then, although I had some guesses. I'll say I had some feeling about it. They have moved now to where they removed all of that. They're holding all of it. NAM is holding it, taking it away from the state convention, all except for Northwest Baptist Convention, where Randy Adams is. They kept theirs and are continuing to grow in church planting. And they're continuing to argue kind of what you just said, Jim, that the people on the field, the people in the state convention, the people in the association, they know what's going on. They may just need a little bit more money for this or for that to help them. But see, that's the problem. Now NAM has pulled all that away. Those state conventions and associations don't know. I got a call a couple of months ago now from a guy in one of the non-South conventions. And you know what he said? he said, NAM has come in and is starting to plant a church in my neighborhood, in my community, where we have 3 other Southern Baptist churches. And this is a non-South area, so you don't have a church on every corner. And he was really put out because his associational missionary had not been talked to. He hadn't been consulted in any way about it. It was a surprise to him. It was a surprise to all those pastors. And when he tried to reach out to the state convention, the only answer he got back from them basically was, hey, what's done is done, out of your control.
Yeah.
You know, the partnership's just not there, you know, and that's kind of how we started the discussion. How are things different now from when they were pre, GCR?
Why did they do that? You said it's like saying, don't get me wrong, there's some churches that are traditional and they're not going to change and they're going to die out over time. So that's true too. But why did they not have a conversation? I'm not asking, but what was their strategy and why do they think hurting relationships by not communicating?
We're hearing that all across the country, Jim. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's just one that called me. But we're hearing those kind of testimonies all across the country because NAM is doing. They're doing the planting. They're targeting the areas, and you know, I guess having been an associational missionary and a state convention exec, as well as a church planter in a non-South area, Pastor Bert, their church was actually one of our churches that helped us with one of the plants there right outside of Ann Arbor. And, you know, one of the things that I know is it was because we had a good partnership and all those things with the state convention, with the association, that we were able to know what needed to be done. We knew better our community where we were than anybody sitting in Alpharetta. How can Alpharetta know what the best thing is in Anchorage, Alaska? How can they know what the best thing to do is in Hawaii somewhere? How can they know what the best thing to do in Tucson? They just can't know what's the best thing to do in every area. That's why historically it's been so critical for Southern Baptists to have that connectedness and cooperation, not competition, but cooperation.
Cooperation, but also you have competency issues. So you can say that they know well, but there are some things that I noticed at NAM seminaries. There is a lack of competency in all the areas that are required to run a business, because we are more than a business. We cannot operate in any way less than a business when it comes to finances and accountability for production at some level.
Yeah.
Now, again, you're not going to have 100% production, but I have observed personally in talking to people, I have a STEM degree, actually a professional STEM degree before entering seminary. And the lack of linguistic competency among some of our PhD professors shocked me. They couldn't have a conversation and follow a logic thought that you're forced to do in engineering, architecture. I had to take business courses, ethics. There's ethical things that core values that lost people share that we don't always operate effectively or efficiently at. And that's what concerns me is that there are people who may have good hearts for the Lord, but they lack the competency and the experience on how to run things on a business end. They know how to run it through in a social way. Like, I know these buddies, and they're relying more upon that at a level that the level of national level and state level requires more knowledge and more experience and more transparency than they are even aware they need. It's not, I don't think it's because they're trying to be wrong. I think they lack the exposure, because it's painfully obvious to me that they don't know how to run things economically. They don't understand how basic business ethics work, and they run it kind of like a family business, which you can get away with some things that you couldn't get away with at Merck or at GE, and we see even there when they get caught, it's a big problem. And I'm just concerned that we don't have the right people in place in these organizations to alert people, hey, we need to step back and evaluate this a little bit different than we are. We need to be more transparent. That's my concern. I'm not seeing that clearly. And I'd like to have some answers.
Bert, go ahead, and then I need to wrap us up. I've got one more thing I wanted to throw out there, but Bert, go ahead with your comment.
Just going back to the whole GCR issue 10 years ago and kind of what they allowed. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I am, that in that statement, you saw a move away from the cooperative program.
Mhm.
You saw people who said, you know, as long as you're given to this missions, we're going to count that in your missions giving altogether. And it was a shift away from cooperative program giving. And when you have a step away from cooperative program giving, then you have this step away from the accountability of the cooperative program. And you're starting to see the societal method giving once again, where, hey, the first to rush in and make sure that they have the suite program or the PowerPoint presentation for your church, they get the money. And now we even see it where they're skirting churches and going directly to people in churches. Me, this is a problem with the Great Commission focus that they had is it is moving us away from cooperative program giving to a much different way of doing missions than what we as Southern Baptists have said we wanted to be.
Yeah, and you alluded to the proposed changes to the business and financial plan that the EC put out. We don't have time to discuss that now, but we'll do that in another roundtable. But let me ask this first. First, I'm going to ask two questions, but first, a rhetorical question. Do not answer. But have you been somewhat suspicious about what is probably behind the scenes of the Great Commission Resurgence document, which apparently, this is what we've seen being implemented? And there were people who were suspicious of some of what we've seen happening even then, before it was approved. And it was narrowly approved at the Orlando Convention. It wasn't overwhelming. It's actually done by hand up, hold your ballot up, which I think was unwise and maybe manipulative, because it was pretty close from what I'm told from those who were counting. But rhetorically, are you suspicious? Okay. Now then, I want an answer to this. The records for the Great Commission Task Force have all been held secretively. They've all been hidden. Originally, it was for 10 years, and then it came back and was changed to 15 years. Does that make you suspicious? Are you wondering what's really there now that what we've seen? I'm throwing it out. What do you think by them? We're just talking transparency.
Bobby, I thought I kept up with Southern Baptist stuff pretty well over the last 25 years or so, but the sealed documents is one thing that somehow, if I heard that before, I didn't know, I've forgotten. What is the reason that they're giving? Because one of the overarching things that I'd like to kind of interject in some of our discussions is, I don't want to believe that there's really nefarious intent, that somebody's intentionally trying to deceive and pull something over, intentionally trying to go around directors of missions and stuff like that. It's a system that we've created that is not working and needs to be reformed. And so I'm assuming what was the reasoning to have these documents sealed? Was there a reason given? I don't understand that.
Well, the question has been asked a lot. I'll tell you what I've heard in a minute, but let's get some feedback from the other two guys.
Okay.
Bert, hit it.
I don't know.
I don't know if that's Jim wanting to say, no, I want the last word or what. But
this whole thing smells of, I've got family members, friends, and all who have been Shriners and Masons and so forth. And it's one of those things that the higher up you get, the more secretive it is, to the point where, we even had some Masons do part of a funeral that happened to be conducted here. Man, unless you're in the know, you have no clue what on earth they just said or did. And to me, it looks like we're moving step by step closer to that. Like, we don't have a clue what you just said or did. Okay. And it's just, again, that step from transparency. I have no clue what happened in that funeral in our worship center, and I never will. And I think that's how it is with these documents. It may be sealed for 15 years, but who's really going to know the truth? I don't know why they were sealed.
Weird.
Jim?
I just have that song going through my head, the room where it happened. Noah was in that room where it happened, where Hamilton had that backroom deal after he had that affair and stuff, and just bad. What the Bible says, that the man who hides a thing don't conceal things. What if this is the Great Commission Resurgence, and we're all about the Great Commission? That's the marching orders for the church. It's not to be hidden. So do we have the same vocabulary in a different dictionary? Because that's what I'm concerned about. Why would we have this group formed to inform Southern Baptists, and then we get no information and they lock it? None of that. It's locked for 15 years. Anybody else see a contradiction here? A very apparent contradiction that indicates there is a lack of problems, that or a desire to move things in a direction that they knew would be problematic, given our history as a denomination tried to reshape our denomination from inside by getting power as a representative, but not being accountable to those you're representing. That's where I want to know that. Is that what happened? And release these documents, let other people and deal with them and look at them, and then respond to it. And if these people are in a position of power, are we going to just kowtow to the direction they're going without any representation? I mean, that's the whole part of our denomination. We are representative of a denomination of all our churches. And again, if 80%, are those 80% of those 7,000 churches on board? I'd like to know. Are all the churches on board? If you want to play whatever game you want to play, let us know. I don't understand this from a sense of Christian ethics, why we were not transparent and open about a study that was supposed to make us better at evangelism.
Right, because the truth of the matter is, Ronnie Floyd was the chairman of the Great Commission Resurgence, and Ronnie Floyd is not a pope, even though he's now gotten himself into the EC chair position. I'm not sure how all that happened, but he obviously is there now. And I guess I can't be quite as we'll call it gracious, is what Don is, about not wanting to think there's nefarious things going on. I love that word. And that's because you see some very, very clear patterns that have occurred that's going on. And I mean, we're not Catholics. We're not a high church where things are dictated down to the church. Southern Baptists are supposed to be from the church up. And since the Great Commission Resurgence, to me, it just seems like we are quickly losing the partnerships, almost totally gone. If they totally disappear and we don't push back as churches, if we don't push back to say, no, we don't want to lose this partnership. We want to keep the partnership. I mean, what NAM did, well, I'll give 2 points with this. What NAM did when they defunded all of the non-South associational missionaries across the country, they defunded them and said, we want them to be church planting catalysts. Well, that was part of the role, just like that's what my assignment was in Michigan when I was there. And I spent 50% or more of my time working with church planting. And that was kind of what we were supposed to be doing. But they totally changed it and defunded you if you were just going to be associational missions. And that's decimated associations all across the country in non-South areas. But the second thing, and jumping way back to something Bert said a while ago, talking about the NAM calendar, prayer calendar, talking about the Annie Armstrong videos, all those kind of things. A lot of people don't realize this, but one of the things that NAM did when they came in is we had about 50 people in an evangelism department who specialized in collegiate evangelism, specialized in interfaith evangelism, specialized in special event evangelism, all kinds of things, apologetics, and these kinds of things. And NAM got rid of them all, either fired them right out of the gate with that 125 they fired right up front when Ezel got there, or they started defunding them, or they moved them to other departments and eventually faded them out, or forced them into retirement. and they got rid of them. They put in a part-time pastor who came in. He was pastoring a church. I don't remember. It seems like it's about 1,000 or so here in Atlanta, and he came in as the part-time leader with a secretary or ministry assistant in that role, and that became the evangelism department for years. And what they did is they went from a small marketing and event department to now they have like 32 people in marketing and events. So the videos we see, we don't need to have but 5 or 6 or 7 really good stories, right? And then we send in the camera crews and we help work up the storyboards and we get a great story. So that little church, like my wife and I've talked about this, she's from Central Louisiana. Man, her little country church, she said, people in my church would have no clue. They wouldn't believe this. They have no idea what's going on. They give their money faithfully to the cooperative program to support missions. And that's not what's happening now, And so we're going to get great stories because we got a great PR arm now, at the North American Mission Board. Jim, you had a comment.
Bobby, can you have the guys here too, just to share what it is, in a nutshell, your top 2 things while you're a Southern Baptist, and not doctrine, because we can get this doctrine at another church. There's churches have similar doctrine. What is it that makes you a Southern Baptist or want to be a cooperative Baptist in the cooperative program?
Go ahead, Bert.
First.
Yep, go ahead.
I believe in the historic use of the cooperative program. I don't like where it's going now. And truthfully, I love the people whom I pastor here. And because God has called me to this church, and this church cannot not be a Southern Baptist church, that's why I'm still Southern Baptist.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, I think Jim's baiting us so that we will say evangelism and missions. I mean, that's what we're all about, and doing it cooperatively. Like Bert said, I'll never forget, I was 8 years old and a deacon at our church, my home church in Baton Rouge, explaining to me. Now, how we were having this conversation with an 8-year-old, I don't know, but I do remember it still, Brother Stoker telling us we can do more together than we can do individually. And I that's still my heartbeat all these years later. And so that's why I'm a Southern Baptist.
Okay, Jim?
I'll just give you my story. I was not raised Southern Baptist. I went to Clemson University. I became a believer, born again, and followed Christ. And I come from a Catholic background. They're not going to support me to do evangelistic ministries. This BSU, cooperating with the association, cooperating with their state convention, cooperating with Colorado Baptist Convention, cooperating with NAM. NAM paid my insurance. They sent me to Colorado, young kid, never would have been exposed to missions. I tried to talk to God about getting out of serving him full time. And it was the process of me being funded by all those different groups and agencies working together and being thrown in the middle of an area I didn't know about, Estes Park, Colorado. I was this, New Jersey, northern New Jersey area guy. I was like, what's going on here? Preaching, teaching, and sensing God moving, and investing in kids and youth to be missionaries, investing in those 2-year kids out of college to get them to buy into missions and believing in missions and doing more together. My church could not support a full-time missionary on our own, but with 4 or 5 other churches or 40,000 churches, we can support 5,000-10,000 missionaries doing that work. When I was lost and I got saved, I said, there's a couple things I know I can do right. I can get baptized like Jesus got baptized. I can give, but I want to go to a church that preaches the Bible and actually makes strong effort towards missions and evangelism. And I couldn't find anything quite like the cooperative program and the associations and states like I did at Southern Baptist. Now, that's a northern guy who I told my girlfriend in high school who was a Southern Baptist, you Southerners, go back home, you bunch of backwards yahoos. I am not a Christian. I don't believe in your God, but I will never of anything ever become a Southern Baptist. But because of the missions and the evangelism and the cooperative work that this guy who was convinced that Southerners were wrong and they need to get their head on straight became a Southern Baptist. And northern states, think about that. I am that person in northern states for the most part. You got to convince us.
Yeah. Well, and I know there's a lot of discussion. We're not going to get into that about, when it came up about dropping the name Southern. And a lot of people said, no, we're proud of the heritage, et cetera, et cetera. But for those of us who have served in northern climates,
Yep.
the most common question I had to respond to when I was church planting in Michigan was, why are you Southern Baptists? This isn't the South. And I responded to that question more than anything else. And so then, of course, you have to explain that every church is independent and we make our own decisions. We're not under a hierarchy of any sort,
Right.
but we cooperate is the word I always use. We cooperate for missions and evangelism with churches all across the United States. And my fear is that's disappearing. The cooperation. It's become more competition than it has been cooperation now because of what's happened. Guys, we're going to have to wrap up. We've gone longer than what we kind of anticipated today with this topic, but we are going to talk some more in some other roundtables about some of the other topics. Some of this may resurface again because the Great Commission Resurgence has really had a major impact on what's happening in the SBC at this point. So, but let me just thank you guys, Bert and Jim and Don, for joining me today in this roundtable discussion of SBC topics. We're going to do this again, and we'll have more discussion. So just look down in the description. Some of the things we've referred to, we'll try to put it in the description of the video so you have some direct links, and we'll try to do that. I know Bert talked about the chart that he had. We'll put that down there, and some of those things we'll try to do that to make it easier for you to find. So on all of that, for our SBC Pastors Roundtable today, I'm Bobby Gilstrap. We hope you'll join us again the next time.